Every great investment you've ever made started with the right connections. Connections to the world's most sought-after investment community, dedicated to improving business and society. You are part of this community. Welcome to iConnections Global Alternatives Conference. In 8 short months, managers and allocators who control a combined $60 trillion in assets have used our platform. But as you know, there's more to our story. Funds for Food was the largest capital introduction conference of 2020, facilitating over 3,000 meetings with the industry's most sophisticated investors, while also raising nearly $2 million supporting those in need during the pandemic. We followed this with Fund Women Week, the largest capital introductions conference in 100 Women in Finance's history. Initiatives like these are at the heart of iConnections' mission. In early 2022, we will combine the latest in virtual and in-person participation at the world-famous Fontainebleau Hotel Miami. You are part of this community because you are the people with the vision to improve society. Invest in progress. Welcome to the world of iConnections.
Hello everyone, I'm Ron Biscardi, the CEO of iConnections. I'd like to thank all of you for participating in this year's Global Alternatives Conference. This is our first year hosting this event, and of course, it's virtual. But we are looking forward to our first in-person Global Alts event, which will be held at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach during Hedge Fund Week in January 2022. This event will feature world-class content prepared by the iConnections Investment Institute, followed by 2 days of one-on-one capital introduction meetings, which we project will number over 10,000. This event will be free for allocators and open to managers who are members of the iConnections platform. So if you're not already a member, please go to iConnections.io to learn more. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe and healthy.
Hi everyone, my name is Raoul Scott, Director, Prime Brokerage Sales for StoneX. The Prime Brokerage team within StoneX Financial Inc. provides hedge funds, family offices, mutual funds, and other investment managers with a full self-clearing Prime services offering, combined with introduced Prime solutions. Using cutting-edge technology, we deliver this unique combination of Prime Brokerage services over a highly integrated and cost-effective platform. I'm excited to be addressing all of you on the iConnections platform as a proud partner of this year's Global Alternatives Conference. The iConnections platform brings the industry together to make informed decisions, share insights, and help one another. It goes without saying that the virtual has been essential to all of us over the past year, and this conference gives us a chance to hear directly from leading experts and engage in conversation. Today's topic is of great importance at this point in time, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce such an impressive group of speakers. Each individual brings their own perspective and expertise from the medical and pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Gregory Poland is the director of Mayo Clinic's Vaccine Research Group. He holds the academic rank of Professor of Medicine and Infectious Diseases and Molecular Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics. He also serves as the president of the Edward Jenner Vaccine Society and is the editor-in-chief for the journal Vaccine. Swati Gupta leads IAVI's emerging infectious disease product portfolio and the development of the organization's overall scientific strategy. Previously, she was an executive director with Merck Vaccines and worked with key external stakeholders to facilitate accelerated Ebola vaccine development efforts. Stephen Hogue is the president of Moderna and leads platform research and development. He joined Moderna in late 2012 from McKinsey & Company, where he was a partner in the healthcare practice. Rich Pelt is a trained chemical engineer and has had several positions within vaccine regulatory affairs at Wyeth Pfizer. Moderating this discussion is Mark Steed, Chief Investment Officer for PSPRS, Arizona's pension plan for first responders. Over the last 10 years at Arizona, Mark has managed private equity, venture capital, absolute return, opportunistic credit, public equity, global trading strategies, and real estate portfolios. His creative approach and notable performance across disparate asset classes won him recognition as a rising star by Money Management Magazine, and later, Asset Allocator of the Year by Institutional Investor. I will now hand it over to Mark.
Thank you. Well, thanks for joining us today, everyone. I'm really excited for this panel. And so let's just get right into it. And I want to start with Dr. Poland and Dr. Gupta. We'll let Stephen Hogue and Rich Pelt enjoy their celebrity for a little bit, Moderna and Pfizer representatives, respectively. But I want to start with the two of you. A lot of experts at the start of this back, I recall being on several calls in March and April, thought that, a vaccine was sort of 3 years out under, ideal circumstances. So, now we have two in kind of a year's worth of time. So how big of an achievement is this, generally, for the U.S. and what does it mean, for these types of genetic vaccines like we have from Pfizer and Moderna? Dr. Poland, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, when you ask what kind of achievement this is, I would say this is an unprecedented human achievement, facilitated by the dollars and resources that were needed, a centralized structure that could negotiate those kinds of contracts, and a science base that stretches back some 30 years. So you put all of that together in the context of a pandemic where trials, and there was a lot of international cooperation on this, could very quickly be accrued. I mean, only in a pandemic could you do 40,000 trials so quickly. So people often look at this and say, were they rushed? They're conflating the political side of things that they hear about with the standard, stable, well understood regulatory pathway for how vaccines are developed and eventually licensed or at least approved through EUA. If there were corners cut, so to speak, it's on the administrative side, not the science side of things. And so I think people can be very confident in that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Dr. Gupta, how about you?
Well, I was going to use the same word as Dr. Poland, unprecedented. I mean, it really is quite an achievement. And we use that word for Ebola vaccine research, which was also accelerated. But I think SARS-CoV-2 really took that a step further. And I think we all know that vaccines are incredibly powerful tools for preventing outbreaks and pandemics, and in this case, helping us to get them under control. But they do require significant investment of resources and time. So just to elaborate a little bit on what Dr. Poland said, vaccines typically cost about $300 to $500 million to develop through licensure. And that includes the cumulative cost of failed vaccines. So as you go through that discovery process, you'll see fewer and fewer candidates that advance into clinical trials. A number of people usually say that there are around 90% of vaccines that fail if you include all stages of development. And then if you think about that typical timeline for vaccine development, it's about 10 to 20 years. And that can be quite a bit different from drug development. So the number of factors that contributed to this, I think, were mentioned. It was the unprecedented global collaboration. And that was really from academia, biotech, pharmaceuticals, industry. And it's not a minor feat. I think we use the word collaboration lightly sometimes, but no one actor could have done this alone. So it was the collaboration. The second was the upfront investment. I think people have seen that groups like Operation Warp Speed have already invested something like $12 billion in different vaccine-related contracts. And other groups in Europe are citing figures like $18 billion. And then the third factor is that major advancement in platform technologies. So really, I think if you had looked at this field a couple of years ago, it's arguable that we might not have been able to achieve what we did this past year with COVID vaccines, just taking our understanding of the human immune system, our understanding of how pathogens evolve and how they infect people, as well as the platform technologies. So I would say, yes, this is a significant achievement. I don't know if we'll be able to replicate it.
Hopefully we won't have to.
But hopefully we'll be able to accelerate.
Thank you so much. Moving over to the industry side, Rich, Dr. Poland brought this up. There's concerns that kind of corners were cut, and I think it's important for us to sort of distinguish between the scientific process, right, from the administrative and some of the messaging, right. So can you, and then Stephen, let's move to you. Share your perspectives, right? As obviously you guys have been working around the clock, right, on sort of the process and sort of your perspectives on this, which is in some ways, unfortunately, a very exciting time for us in a way that we wish we didn't have to be excited.
Right. Well, I will echo, let's hope it doesn't have to happen again anytime soon. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm getting a little tired of it now. So let's hope it doesn't have to happen again. I will echo exactly what these guys are saying. Were there corners cut? No. Scientifically, no. Administratively, maybe here and there, but nothing that would impact anything negatively. It's all positive. I would say the biggest thing that drew this to where it is now is really prioritization. You basically put everything else aside, it was not as important, and you move forward aggressively. Return on investment was not a priority. Expenditure was not a priority. And so you put the best scientists, best engineers, and you collaborate them together, as we've been saying, and you can get these things done very rapidly and safely.
Yeah, I would, and I agree. And I think people should have a tremendous amount of confidence in the science that's been produced over the last year. As everybody was just saying, it's in many ways in the best traditions of science, right? I think Dr. Poland was referring to this. That's a great relay race that we're all part of. We're all running a leg in that relay race, but it's been going on for decades and centuries. And certainly all of the things that came together in Moderna's technology and approach, as well as Pfizer's, has a legacy that's decades old, right? It's not only invented by us, and we're running this leg of the race. And what you have as an obligation in science is, always to be transparent and rigorous in what you're doing. And I think one of the benefits we also have as a tradition in drug development in this country is we have a gold standard regulator with the FDA, who's very clear and prospective about what they expect. And all of that came together beautifully in 2020 to help really shape the advancements of the vaccines, including, the companies putting out their protocols and being transparent. Here are the clinical trials we're trying to run rigorously and as fast as we can, publishing in peer-reviewed journals the data, including both of us, our phase 3 data, and we're still filling out the gaps and publishing even more. But that's just what we were doing as a company. What we were doing as a society, as a general sort of scientific group, was there were independent data and safety monitoring boards. There were full advisory committee meetings by the FDA that were publicly held. And there continues to be very active disclosure of what's going on, whether it's the CDC or others and state authorities. And that is in the best traditions of science, right? That is in the best traditions of public health, but also science. And that kind of rigorous peer review, prospective describing what we intend to do with our protocols and doing it, I hope allows everybody to look back on the experience and say, well, wow, it may have happened faster than we normally would see, but it exactly looks like what we always want to see. And that way, I think people should have a high degree of confidence in the results.
Yeah. And to that point, so we've talked about the sort of the process, right? And I think there's sort of consensus here that, there weren't corners cut in terms of, the scientific process. And, we can kind of set aside its sort of administrative issues, which we all can relate to. But let's talk about the safety of the vaccines, right? So, and I just want to get the take from all four of you if you have a view. But, Stephen, we'll start with you, Moderna, and then Rich, your perspective. But we've all met people that are very hesitant, right, to take the vaccine, right, for one reason or another. It could be something they read on, online about, a side effect, or, the fact that it's, these are mRNA vaccines, right? So, what would you say? What would your advice be to people who are, hesitant to take the vaccine? What do we know about the safety of these vaccines so far?
Yeah, well, I think we can come back to the data, or at least as a scientist and a physician, that's where I'll always start in the conversation. And I think we can provide people a high degree of confidence that we do know a lot about the safety of these vaccines. We don't know everything, and we're going to learn more in the time ahead. But what we do know is we ran large, 30,000 and 40,000 person phase 3 trials placebo-controlled, and were able to at least study in the first 3 to 6 months the safety profiles of these vaccines pretty intensely. And in both cases, what we saw was, that the vaccines were actually reasonably well tolerated. Yes, there were some what we call adverse reactions, so people will feel like they got the vaccine. But in terms of the kinds of really concerning safety signals that would cause us to say the benefit of the vaccine is not outweighed by them, we didn't see those in either the Pfizer study or the Moderna study so far. And that's important because in the first few months after giving a vaccine is when you would normally expect to see the overwhelming majority of those events happen. Usually people talk about 6 weeks. The FDA said, look, we want to see at least 8 weeks, and for the right reasons, because we want to be conservative in terms of the rollout of these vaccines. And ultimately, we think that's the sort of the minimum bar we had to clear, and we definitely, I think, both vaccines cleared it, and hope all the others do as well. What's left then are questions about much rarer events that you may only see over much longer periods of time. And I think we should be transparent that we need to continue to study the vaccines over the next 2 years to make sure that there aren't such rare events. We haven't seen any of those signals yet, but until we have completed the full follow-up in the phase 3 trial, we won't know for sure. But I think people should have a high degree of confidence that based on the data that was generated and the precedents in terms of when you usually see those sorts of events, that the vaccines were done the right way and that they are safe to use. Otherwise, obviously, regulators and independent safety monitoring boards and recommending boards wouldn't be recommending.
Yep. That's exactly, Steve. And I'll echo everything Wade said. The studies were done in such a way, and the safety profile of these vaccines, both of them, from what I can tell, meet all the requirements you would expect of a normal vaccine. The profiles that we see are typical of any other vaccine that has come out. In addition, I'll just add this: there's a aggressive post-approval, post-authorization surveillance going on, very aggressive. It comes back to the companies. The information is fed very rapidly. Investigations are done and trying to develop what the root cause could possibly be. And so that is an ongoing situation that we're always on top of. So again, people should be very confident in that. I can say many people in my family, except for my family that line or meet the criteria, have had the vaccines. I've had some had Moderna, some have had Pfizer. Let's just say that they're happy they got it right now, and I'm glad they are. So,
that's a great point. So shifting, Dr. Poland and Gupta, to you all, you're not representatives of the manufacturers, right? So as you kind of interpret the data and look at it, what would your advice be, Dr. Poland? Start with you in terms of safety and what you'd advise.
I think context setting is important. The kinds of local and systemic side effects that occur from this and any other vaccine are not evidence of pathology or something gone wrong. They are evidence. There's variability in the human population, but they are evidence of an immune response that's occurring. That's one thing. The second thing is these very large, commendably large trials are still powered such that the rarer events that Stephen was talking about are only caught in the active and passive surveillance mechanisms that are set up. Anaphylaxis, for example, is the only one that I see coming out at this point of the two vaccines. So, I look at safety as a risk benefit. There's absolutely no technology for anything in your life that you use that doesn't contain risk and benefit. I think all of our listeners are in some way in the financial industry. You can't escape risk and benefit. Wisdom resides in as best you can quantitate that risk and as best you can quantitate the benefit, examining that ratio and making a decision. And I think with rare exceptions, the risk-benefit ratio is so hugely in favor of getting a vaccine that, frankly, absent a contraindication, I'll be bold enough to say it would really be ignorant not to get a vaccine in the face of a pandemic raging out of control as it is globally.
Yeah. Excellent. Well said. Dr. Gupta, any thoughts on your safety of the two vaccines we have right now?
I mean, I think I'm not sure I have too much to add. I mean, we heard from the two companies themselves that produce these vaccines, and I think they really know the data inside and out. But what I will say is that I did attend the full advisory committee meetings, which is, a day of meetings on December 10th and the 17th. And for those of people who aren't aware, this is alluded to, the FDA typically schedules what's called a vaccine and related biological products committee, or what we in the vaccine field call VRBPAC. And that's really made of a number of outside scientific and public health experts from around the country. And basically they met to discuss the totality of the safety and the effectiveness data and make a recommendation to the FDA. So that's how the process works. And overall, I heard both vaccines had a very robust benefit risk profile. And that's why they were approved unanimously for emergency use authorization. So I can tell you, and I don't say this lightly as a vaccine developer and a scientist, that I wouldn't hesitate to give the vaccines to either my friends or family. And I'm anxious to take one myself.
There's maybe one other point, Mark, to make about that. And Swati made a good point. I've served on VRBPAC, and I also attended both meetings. When you think about what happens, you've got the company and their scientists looking at the data. You have external DMSBs, so physicians and scientists who are looking at the results, but who are independent of the company looking at the data. You have peer reviewers around the world that see the pre-published data. You have us on VRBPAC examining the data, and you have the FDA scientists doing their own independent review. It is the best system in the world that other countries have sought to emulate because it is so strong and it is such a robust system. No human system's perfect, but it's as close as I've seen in any human endeavor.
Yeah, I think those are really helpful comments, especially because I think the points about risk and reward and benefit are well taken. I think there's side effects and risks to everything, drugs, vaccines, and I think to some extent that it gets to sort of the communication and part of the noise. I think that's been unhelpful.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great.
I would also just say it's essential that we have that balancing act in order to have innovation, right? I mean, one of the things that I think we all love about this country is that we are very innovative with the basic science research, it's in academia, it's in industry and entrepreneurial about that. But that only works if it's partnered with civil service folks, the people, career scientists at places like the FDA, and all of this other infrastructure. If you're just taking risk, but you're not appropriately weighing and checking which risks were smart risks to take, then you actually don't get the kinds of healthy, productive innovation that we're proud of in this culture. And I think it's just to build on something Dr. Poland was saying, I think it's one of the things that we should be proudest of is that both we were able to, in the early parts of 2020, take risks, move forward, leverage those innovations, try to move forward. But as it came to the end of 2022, we brought the best of that, sort of partnered institutions in the government and academia to look at that and say, well, did we make the right choices? Does this weigh appropriately? And I think, there are others, maybe other countries that have, pushed hard and fast on things, but maybe didn't have that same balancing act that we need scientifically. And that obviously is maybe not as much reason for confidence, but I think we should be really proud of that balancing act. It's the core of why we are as innovative a culture as we have. And we often talk about what happens in industry or in the innovative side, but it's actually that balancing act that makes it work.
Yeah. Well said. One of the concerns that gets thrown out that I've heard is, these are mRNA vaccines. And there's not a lot known about them. So Rich, I want to ask you and then Stephen, why mRNA, vaccine, and what's it like to work on an mRNA vaccine versus another type?
Well, I've worked on I had to count it up, I think on around about 10 different vaccine programs. And of course, this is probably the first mRNA vaccine program, and all of them at different states and their life cycle. Some they've already been approved, some are brand new. This one is the only one that went from brand new in the clinic to launch in 9 months. But I would actually say with this one, why mRNA? Well, it simply works, and it works well. It's a great science. Its safety profile is good as we have seen it. We'll get more data as it goes, and it's relative to a lot of the other technologies. The ability to get it out there faster is enhanced. It will get out there faster. But I'll actually say, having worked on numerous programs, there are probably more commonalities with all these vaccines than there are differences. Everyone has a different ebb and flow. Every one of them has its own challenges. Some things seem to be really easy with one vaccine, and the next one, it just gives you a lot of headaches. Some you just have to do a little bit differently. Some you do the same. So I would actually say it's probably more in common with a lot of other vaccines than it is different. And I don't know, Steve, if you have any commentary on that as well.
Well, it's funny. I'll be a juxtaposition, but I'll get to the same place as Rich did, which is I've also worked on 10 vaccines, all of them mRNA, all of them Moderna. So maybe my experience is
there we go.
deeper and narrower at the same time, for sure. Look, I think the other side of this, why I think you saw 2 mRNA vaccines succeed early. By the way, we hope very much that the viral vectored vaccines and the recombinant protein vaccines also succeed. The other technologies hopefully can and should. But I think what you saw happen was the culmination of decades of basic science research, first in academia, some in the government, increasingly over the last decade at companies like Moderna and more recently in Pfizer, where we were working on technologies that would allow us to move very quickly and very flexibly across a range of vaccines. And that was both to plan for pandemics, but also trying to think about new ways of making vaccines that don't require some of the major investments that Swati was talking about, the billions of dollars you have to put into a manufacturing plant. And for us, that was mRNA as a platform technology. It's a very elegant idea. It's a very old idea, but it had a lot of technical hurdles that people had to work through over the last few decades. And I think what happened is over time, in that sort of dogged way that science does, we broke down a lot of those challenges, not just at Moderna, but broadly as a scientific community. And we got to a point where it was sort of ready. And again, I think as Swati had suggested, Greg had suggested, a few years ago, you wouldn't have been ready. And we wouldn't have had these 2 vaccines at the same pace as we do now. But now we are in a situation where not only was it was ready enough for 2 companies to do it very quickly in parallel. And so I think it's, I think it's an exciting technology that we should apply more broadly across other vaccines. Won't be the only way to make vaccines in the future. There's going to be lots of other very effective ways. But it's one that I think we benefited from that decade of research, and really it was the right moment at the right time for the right technology.
Context again is so important, as Stephen and Rich and Swati have alluded to. When Drew Weissman and others really understood what you could do with mRNA in fact, I think they published in 1990 about this, accelerate forward 13 years. And that platform was the one chosen to try to address SARS-CoV-1. Lessons learned there. So the mRNA vaccines, if you will, the risk was in using a platform that hadn't been marketed before, but for a very real reason. You had a Ferrari sitting there. And to use an analogy, all you had to do was change the GPS system. Where are we going to go and what are we targeting? And that makes mRNA vaccines, and I think the right word was used, an elegant but simple platform, because now any disease for which a protein of interest needs to be neutralized, whether it be allergy, oncology, infectious diseases, and other applications, are now amenable to that platform. So I think we're going to see quite a growth in mRNA technology use throughout medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good point, because one of the things that there's I think we had a question from the community about this was sort of the supply, right? And I think Dr. Gupta mentioned that this is kind of to start in her introductory comments, that this is kind of a platform type of vaccine, and we're kind of hearing from Stephen and Rich that like these things can scale. So can you talk about the Rich, why don't we start with you? I'll start with the industry side, I suppose, but Dr. Poland and Gupta, if you have comments, please weigh in here. But I think the question from the community was, what constraints stand in the way of dramatically ramping up vaccine manufacturing beyond the near-term levels? Is it capital or education related? Is it materials? So can you talk about sort of where we are now? Obviously, we all read about supply issues and a number of months here, and to some extent the distribution's up to the state. So it could vary depending on where our listeners are. But Rich, maybe you can address that one. And Stephen from the industry side.
Yeah. In general, it seems like, first from my position where I'm sitting within the Pfizer-BioNTech partnership, I don't see a capital constraint in our area right now. Down the supply chain and distribution to the actual patient, we can all read the news and we hear criticism of what's happening and how hard it is. Yes, my mother went and got it and she had to wait in line 2 or 3 hours. Not too bad, but really, come on, we should be able to get somewhere at some point where we can get that rolling out. The other thing, sometimes it just takes time, and I'm not saying the order of a normal vaccine, years and years. It takes a few months to bring on another line. You can't just add another one just at the snap of a finger. You actually have to do these things, and we're doing that in collaboration with our partner. We're adding new abilities to supply, adding new material suppliers, and growing that infrastructure as quickly as we can. So again, using your science and engineering to expand those with a platform that actually is very conducive to doing that. But you have to do it right.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing I'd add to what Rich said is that bit about doing it right. We have an obligation. We all do, but in industry in particular, when we make a drug, it's got to be exactly what we say it is, and it can't. There can be no defects in there. Can't be any quality concerns. But it's even minor things. It can't be that it's only 90% as potent as you said. It has to be what you made the first time. And I think that's where we have an obligation as we scale capacity. I know people would say, well, why can't you just copy paste and do more? And it's like, well, you actually have a huge amount of activity you got to put around the quality of what you do. And that's whether we do it ourselves or we transfer it to other people. And that's actually in some ways the lead times here, which is, there is 6-9 months for us to bring new capacity online, no matter who does it, because you want to make sure that by the time it gets up and operating, that it's really high quality, that whether you got a dose of vaccine from plant one in country, Y or someplace else, it's actually the same and it's going to work the same way. And you can rely on it. Regulators can rely on it. People can rely on it. Doctors can rely on it. And so that's the frustrating thing about scaling up. Now, we all thought a year ago, at least I'll talk from Moderna, we thought, look, we're going to find a way to make, upwards of 1 billion doses in 2021, that'll actually suffice to answer a lot of need. And I think Pfizer started in a similar number. They're heading towards 2 billion now, which is great. And I think many other manufacturers sort of looked at similar and said, we're going to try and tackle 1 billion. There was not much magic to that number. It just felt like everybody picking a swim lane. And there was, candidly, there's a need for 5, 6, 7, 8 vaccines. And so, you kind of, pick off your portion, say, I think we can tackle this. As we look now, and some have had success and some haven't, and there's some delays and other challenges, obviously we all want to find ways to accelerate the manufacturing, whether it's with these, Pfizer and Moderna or other potential sources of that. But also we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we expect J&J, Johnson & Johnson to have a vaccine here shortly, and many others. And we're optimistic that actually this solution will not just be that we make more, but that actually there's many more options available.
Yeah, I might add on to that. For the vaccine manufacturers, they want to distribute as much as they can. They're not the obstacle here. There may be supply chain issues that have to be solved, but let me just give you an example as of last week. So the numbers I'm going to give are per 100 people in the population. Israel had immunized 29 out of 100. UAE 18, Bahrain 9.6, the US 4.5. The UK, almost 7. What's the difference there? They have a national health service. They have remember, OWS was really our first modern day foray into centralizing something like that. What we don't have is the downstream distribution and logistics of that worked out. You hear numbers like 45 million doses have been distributed, but only 15 million given. Well, that's not a manufacturer side problem. that's a distribution and local logistics issue, because you've got, all 52 states, you got 3,006 different counties and territories in the U.S., all making different decisions about who gets vaccine, when and where. So, that's another inhibitory aspect of the whole issue.
That's a great point. And I think to some extent, right, it could be difficult to build out the supply chain when you're not really sure, if a particular therapy is going to be, effective, right? I mean, that's always kind of struck me as something that's difficult to do, right? You're not sure when the approvals are going to come, if they're going to come, what the data is going to look like. And sometimes you need lead time, right? I think to build out the supply chain. And I think sometimes that can be hard to do.
And particularly with the manufacturers, maybe in this case, particularly Pfizer, manufacturing this at risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if our guess is wrong here, we've set aside everything else and we've devoted all our capital and manpower to, pretty much a single issue.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that, those of us that are, are in, institutional investment can appreciate that that's a very complicated, that's not an easy algorithm, right? Especially when the stakes are so high with something like this. Shifting maybe a little bit here, I just want to talk about, some of these things that are in the pipeline, right? When we've heard, Rich and Stephen say that, we probably need 7 or 8 or, more vaccines. Dr. Gupta, you've been, obviously involved in other applications. And can you talk about maybe what's in the pipeline, and Dr. Poland too, what's in the pipeline that might be additive to the 2 vaccines we have here in the U.S., right? I guess we expect the Johnson & Johnson, vaccine to be approved. I think that's kind of consensus. I don't know if that's everyone's view here. And I read that I think the EU is considering the AstraZeneca, vaccine as well here in the coming days. Can you share, from your perspective, Dr. Gupta, what's in the pipeline that might be accretive to the 2 mRNA vaccines we have today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, as all of us are aware, in the past 2 months, we've seen this amazing phase 3 data announced for a couple of candidates that we're talking about right now. And, hopefully those vaccines are going to help us to end the acute phase of the pandemic. But I think given that COVID-19 is likely to become endemic in the population, we really need to plan for the longer term management of COVID-19 as an ongoing public health threat. And as was already mentioned, if you're giving a vaccine to almost 8 billion people and it's a 2-dose vaccine, you're talking about 16 billion doses of vaccine or something like that. So I agree, with the other panelists that we're going to need a number of candidates. And there are modeling and different predictions out there that it's going to take us several years to really achieve worldwide protection, especially if we're talking about middle and lower income countries. Mm. So I think while the speed has been unprecedented, it's important that we continue to work towards vaccines. And what's in the pipeline, some of those are things that, like single dose vaccines is one example. That's J&J has a single dose vaccine. Some of these candidates have improved temperature stability. Some of them have better or maybe, additional manufacturing scalability. And then also looking to provide the most comprehensive coverage that you possibly can. So I think that there are a number of what people are calling second wave vaccines out there. And I think if you think about a 1-dose vaccine, we're already sort of hearing that there is some confusion about whether or not you can sort of mix candidates. And I think if you did have a 1-dose vaccine, that would really remove that logistical challenge, of needing to keep track of what someone got the first time versus the second time. It could also extend your vaccine supply because you only need 1 dose. And hence you would save on needles and syringes, raw materials, etc. In the pipeline are definitely more thermostable vaccines. Current vaccines, some of them -20, -80 storage, which is an ultra cold storage temperature. I know many developers are working on more thermostable vaccines, so what we call refrigerated 2 to 8, and also lyophilized vaccines. So that's where you sort of make your vaccine into a powder, and then it's reconstituted into a liquid. And that can be much easier to reach the developing world. And then there's different routes of administration. So you have things like orally delivered vaccines or intranasal vaccines. So if you had a one-dose vaccine that you could give through a tablet, that could be a lot easier to administer, something like polio. And we do have people working on things like that, like Vaxart. So I should probably mention here that, in the spirit of disclosure, we did announce today that unfortunately our live replicating live viral vaccine that we've been developing in partnership with Merck did not work intramuscularly. So we are going to be going back to the drawing board a little bit, and we are going to be thinking about alternative routes of administration like oral or intranasal vaccines, and also alternative vaccine designs. So just two other points I'll mention. One is that, as the data comes out, we will need to continue to see where do the vaccines work best, which populations. So far, they look pretty good across the board. But we're waiting for more data in children. And then we're also waiting on the duration of immunity. So how long will each of the vaccines work? We never know that before a vaccine is licensed. You have some idea maybe from some preclinical studies, but you never know. So we need to look at that. And then finally, we need to look at, are you protecting against symptomatic disease or symptomatic disease and asymptomatic infection? And I think the thing that people forget is you can get vaccinated, you can be protected from clinical disease, but you could still get infected and transmit to other people. So we really need to look at vaccines that block transmission. So I think that going forward, some of these additional second wave vaccines hopefully will expand our toolbox against COVID-19 and provide additional options for such a large public health threat.
Yeah, I would agree with that and endorse those comments. There's another side to it, and it has to do, we kind of all understand the idea of personalized medicine, but that extends to personalized vaccinology too. Very likely, we're going to find out that different vaccines work for a lot of different reasons, not necessarily efficacy, better in one geographic location because they don't have ultra cold freezers or are easy to administer to kids versus adults, or we're going to find differences in perhaps their efficacy against some of the variant viruses, et cetera. So, it kind of reminds me, these things were invented, and it wasn't until this was invented that somebody could say, wow, now we can do social media platforms or we can do this and that. We're going to learn a lot about these new and different vaccine platforms. We need them all. It's not just supply. But I think, again, we're going to find out we may end up saying we'll use this kind of vaccine in this age group, another kind in a different age group. Kind of reminds me of influenza. While there's a lot of overlap, we have some 7, 8 influenza vaccines, different types of vaccines licensed in the US for different age groups or different risk categories. And I have no doubt that as we get to second generation, even third generation vaccines, as Swati said, almost certainly based on what's happening with mutations, this will become an endemic virus. And we'll be looking at things like a combination influenza and coronavirus vaccine as one example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great points too. I think, in terms of, for me, it's one thing to be vaccinated against the, COVID-19, the symptoms, right? It's another thing to not be spreading it. And so I think it's important for everyone to understand that even if they're vaccinated, right, they shouldn't, go to the airport and start lick all the railings, right? You can still get other people sick.
Stop doing that.
Yeah. I don't think that has anything to do with being vaccinated. You shouldn't do that anyway.
Yeah, you shouldn't do that anyway.
That's a good offense. So one of the things I'd like to ask you about, Dr. Poland. Why don't I start with you? It's just about we talk about the data, right? We're looking at data, and I think that Dr. Gupta kind of alluded to some of the things you're all looking at. But when we say that, and others feel free to jump in too. What data are we looking at? I mean, presumably this has to do with antibodies, and maybe you could address the issue of how these the antibodies from vaccination might look relative to antibodies just from infection. Yeah. But help us understand what we're going to, what's the medical community looking at, sure. In terms of the data.
Yeah. So, again, some context setting. you have to respond to a virus, and you have to respond quickly to a virus that's infected now in the US 1 out of 14 people and killed about 1 out of 815 people. So that's the context. We're in the middle of a forest fire, okay? Given that, you're building the airplane while you fly it, so to speak, right? The FDA, and I think appropriately said, we'll look at the data at 2 months. Well, now we're getting to 3 and soon 4 months and 5 and 6 months and longer for some of the clinical trial participants. We're going to learn things. So what are the things that are of interest? Is there differential efficacy across specific age or risk groups, particularly as we march down into younger children? How will everything we know vary or be modified by the effect of genetic mutations and viral recombination events that are occurring? We have really good data on severe and symptomatic infection. For how long? That will be important. We have less robust data on asymptomatic infection, on transmission, particularly with some of the new variants. Those will be important. I frankly don't think we're going to end up with any other safety concerns at this point. I mean, you got a lot of people who have been immunized by this point, and nothing is really showing up, with the exception of anaphylaxis and some hypersensitivity reactions in a narrow group of people who may have other reasons to be at higher risk. So we may learn something about that. The other thing that will be interesting is, for the most part, the clinical studies have been conducted in an environment where people who participate in these studies are interested in their health. They've worn masks and they've distanced. What happens when masks are off? I think those will be some interesting data that we'll really want to get an eyeball on.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Rich or Stephen, do you guys have any perspective on that in terms of what data you all are looking at, and how you see the next few months developing?
Yeah, I think I think in addition to the clinical studies and the information that's going to continue to come out of those, a clinical study doesn't start and end in a very clear time frame, especially in a day like this. You continue monitoring for quite a while afterwards and doing follow-up visits. I'm also very curious to see how the epidemiology starts to morph across the different regions of the world. Dr. Poland mentioned that Israel has a very high uptake of the vaccine there, and they will likely reach, we would believe, herd immunity earlier than maybe some of the other regions if they continue that pace. I think a lot of the scientists and epidemiologists are going to be looking at that region very closely to see how quickly things really start to turn. It might be a very nice, large sample size to see how fast does herd immunity get achieved here? How quickly does the vaccine and effectively does it mitigate transmission from one to the other? I think that is going to be very interesting, and I'm guessing coming months. It won't take long before we'll start to see something. I have to resist looking at the phone and looking at the data every day to see what's happening in Israel, just because I do know that their uptake of the vaccine has been very, very rapid and efficient.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would share asymptomatic infection as a surrogate for transmission, or eventually transmission data become very interesting. Obviously, to prevent infections, that's something we're going to want to know. I think everybody's referenced that. I also think that this is a dynamic picture. Look, I think Dr. Poland framed it well. Your immunity will evolve over time, right? Wane over time. And we looked at the first couple of months and we saw great protection against disease. That's exciting. That's why we intervened. But we got to follow these folks for a couple of years and maybe longer, and understand at what point does the vaccine provided immunity or natural immunity stop protecting these people, either from infections or from disease. And I think we all hope that we never need it. There are examples of vaccines that don't require protection again in the future, but I think we have to be vigilant that there may be a need for either a booster or at least until we really get control over transmission of the pandemic and really suppress the rate of infection that's happening out there, that we're going to need to, be more vigilant about looking for those infections and trying to protect folks who I think so that time dynamic, how long do we see that durability of protection, and also the question about asymptomatic infections are probably primary concern. I would also just echo the thing that Rich just said and others said about epidemiology, and with a little bit of a wrinkle, independent of the herd immunity experiments that are going on as well. The virus is evolving. It's not sitting still. It didn't start in a human host, and it's still figuring out its best way through the human population. And I think what we're seeing is the emergence of strains, whether the strains that have been described first in the UK or first described in other countries, that has people concerned the virus is finding new and better ways to transmit itself. And that will also change the calculus, right? I think as we look at the efficacy of any of these vaccines, we should hope and assume that they're going to work across them, but we need to prove that time and time again. Now, usually probably just with measuring the vaccine's ability to provide neutralizing antibodies in the blood. But in some cases over time, we may need to go look at whether or not we're actually protecting in the real world against some of these new strains. So that's another thing we'll just need to watch over the next couple of years. Until we've got this thing, sort of fully suppressed and in control, and people are broadly vaccinated or seropositive and protected against it, it's going to be an ongoing battle for the next couple of years.
When Stephen was talking, it reminded me when thinking about data. The other thing, of course, we vaccine developers and physician scientists would love to have it is a correlate of protection. We think that's going to be neutralizing antibody, but we don't know what that level would be. We haven't yet incorporated into that model of thinking about immunity what T-cell immunity might be like and contribute. And you got to be really discerning when you read the literature here and maybe tip off our listeners. What happens with monoclonal antibodies is different than a vaccine that induces a broader polyclonal antibody response. So, those are other factors that play into this really complex hairball that we're trying to tease apart and understand.
Well, and since you brought up sort of the mutations, right? Can we talk just a little bit about those? I think, we all kind of have like Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park kind of in the back of our head. Nature finds a way. So far, I read kind of in the mainstream media, right, that these mutations are sensitive, right, to some of the the vaccines. But maybe Dr. Poland why don't we start with you and let you take a pass at that? How should we what would your advice be to those of us that are looking at the news and worried about mutations? How should we think about that?
Again, context is everything. When you look at the Nelly or the N to Y501 mutation, that is a prime feature of the UK variant. That variant has allowed the virus to be an estimated 50% more transmissible. And just today, Public Health England came out with a paper saying that it might be around 30% more lethal in addition. Well, this tells us the desperate race between the virus time and the vaccine. The more people we get vaccinated and the more we dampen down transmission by the millions through human populations, the better off we'll be. But it does not appear that mutation results in any significant abrogation of the protection level of the vaccine, as opposed to the South African, Brazilian, and Southern Illinois variant, which may actually now be the more dominant virus circulating in the U.S., where there is concern that sera from people who had previously been infected or efficacy against monoclonal antibodies may in fact have some important level of reduction in protection from those therapies. So one of the lessons is that with monoclonal antibodies, You don't want to go in there with one. You never wanted to do that with an RNA virus anyway, but it does inform future strategies. As Steve was saying, and I absolutely agree, we have to watch that same thing on the vaccine-induced immunity side. What I can see so far, and again, let me set context. Your car might be able to go 120 miles an hour, but you only need it to go, all right, let's be truthful, 75 or 80. By law, not more than 65 to 70, okay? So whether it can go 120 is functionally irrelevant. The same may be true with slight diminutions in antibody response to these variant viruses. I'm just making this up, but let's say that you need a level of 100 and the vaccine induces a level of 500, and with the new variant, it's 450 or 400. Probably, so what? We'll have to watch that. That may play into the duration of protection. Again, we don't know that. But those are the sorts of things that we're trying to sort out, trying to look at, trying to understand in the changing epidemiology and the protection and polyclonal nature of the antibody response generated by these. Where it's likely to be a tougher problem, my own prediction, is in the other vaccine platforms. This is a platform that even, let's take your Jeff Goldman scenario. In the worst case, and Stephen and Rich could comment better than I, but you can rapidly pivot an mRNA vaccine to just give, going back to the car analogy, a new GPS program in it. Okay, the blueprint has changed by this. Now we're gonna produce antibody against a different spike protein. Little more difficult with some of the other vaccine platforms, I suspect.
Yeah, Rich, go ahead, Dr. Gupta, and then Rich, will go back to you.
Sure. No, I was just going to highlight a slightly different point. I mean, what this highlights to me, I'm an epidemiologist by training, and the strain surveillance is going to be really, really important for us to stay ahead of this. I think all viruses mutate. We know that. But unfortunately, with SARS-CoV-2, I think we're seeing that the rate of mutation is faster than we thought. And it's the combination of certain mutations that, may get us into trouble. And so I think through surveillance, there's a lot of things you can do. You can, basically determine if that virus is spreading more quickly in people. So that's like the UK variant. You can figure out if it's causing more severe disease or increased mortality, like potentially the South African strain. We need to make sure that our diagnostic tests still work.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of surveillance that we need to do as these new strains are evolving to sort of see what proportion of infections or, disease are these tests able to diagnose. And then, as mentioned, you have decreased susceptibility to monoclonal antibodies, or are you able to evade, vaccine-induced immunity? So in the UK, they're sequencing, somewhere around 10% of all the samples taken from coronavirus testing, which is, a lot higher than other countries. And we do a fraction of that in the US. So I think we're really going to have to beef up our surveillance, if you will, to stay ahead of the virus and try to do some of the things that are being talked about now, like, a booster shot, and also thinking about how do you get that approved? How do you roll out that as well?
Really, really critical point about viral epidemiology and surveillance.
Yeah. That's and I think it's really helpful for consumers of information, to kind of understand how complex this is and appreciate, that this isn't sort of Newtonian physics here, right? This is biology, and I mean, you have sort of evolving systems and agents, right? That have memory, frankly, and
that raises a point, Mark. And let me be a little bit controversial here. But one thing the future may hold. Right now, we're trying to prevent everything. Right? We want to prevent disease, symptomatic, severe, asymptomatic transmission. It could become a scenario where after we're through this initial push of immunization, what we'll care about, sort of like the flu vaccines, is that what we're trying to prevent are the complications of that infection, right? If you have the sniffles at one level, so what? What we don't want to have happen is that you get pneumonia, myocarditis, get hospitalized, put on a ventilator, go to an ICU, or die. So, our target might subtly shift as the future becomes the current.
Yeah, great point. Rich or Stephen, you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess holistically, I guess I would say for people reading the news and they get nervous to hear about the new variants. I got lots of friends and family asking questions about them, and I'd say, well, just one, take a breath, and to coin the phrase, let the science do the work. It'll come back around. If we have to, for lack of a better term, tweak the genetics of it, we will. And if we have to start making it and make adjustments and make it again and make more of it, we'll do it. We've done it before and we'll do it again. So.
Yeah. And I would, maybe to end on a note of optimism, like Rich just did, we've learned a lot in the last year. So there's a lot we don't know. And I think what you hear us all is judiciously saying, we got to be careful about what we don't know about the future, but let's not lose sight of the fact that we've actually probably learned more in the last year than we ever thought we could. And we're well down that path. And so, to the extent that you hear us saying, or at least I'll speak for myself, I'm saying, look, we need to stay vigilant. We need to look and monitor these things over the next 2 years, both in the clinical studies and the epidemiology, and prepare for booster strategies or how we manage variants. That's us saying, or me saying, we're going to stay ahead of this problem. We're not winning yet, but we're on a path that we're happy with. We have really good tools that we didn't have a year ago, and we're going to beat this thing. But we can't just assume that, we're just going to get a vaccine, take off the mask, and the next day everything's fine. This is going to be a bit of a fight for the next year or 2 years. But we have, I think we have reasons for optimism. We've turned the corner. We know enough now. We just need to stay vigilant and keep fighting.
It also points out that there are collective responsibilities, right? Your guys' job has been to manufacture and supply the vaccine. Our job is to administer the vaccine. But the public has a job to listen to the science, not some celebrity who last took an 8th grade biology course 40 years ago, right? I'm being a bit facetious, but not too far off. And to follow recommendations with masking and distancing. That's what's going to get us out of this. And the longer we take to do this and just follow those basic recommendations, more people that are going to die, frankly, and the longer our way of life will be disrupted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we as consumers have learned a lot too through this process, and I think we tend to kind of ignore some of the research and publications generally, right? And I think to some extent that makes us, it's kind of to our detriment, right? That when we actually have to be informed to make decisions, we're not really literate, sort of in the scientific and statistical way. As our time kind of winds down here. Dr. Gupta, I do want to ask you, we've been focused mostly kind of on the U.S., but can you talk about sort of distribution of, vaccines and, what the future looks like for maybe low-income countries, right? You referenced earlier that a lot of consumers, a lot of people affected don't have cold storage that goes to minus 80, or 20. So can you talk about what the options are for, a lot of the, those kind of developing economies?
Yes, it's a really important question, and I was hoping we would be able to get to it. I mean, at IAVI, we're a nonprofit scientific research organization, so we develop all of our products with the goal of making them affordable and globally accessible, and we do a lot of work in the developing world. And one of the main initiatives for the international distribution of vaccines is called the ACT Accelerator, that some people may have be following and heard of. And that's co-led by CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the WHO, the World Health Organization, where the goal really is global collaboration to accelerate development and deployment of vaccines, as well as tests and treatments. And their goal is to really end the acute phase of the pandemic by the end of 2021 by providing access to at least 2 billion doses of vaccines to the most vulnerable economies. And COVAX is sort of the vaccine arm of the ACT Accelerator, and they've already engaged over 190 economies. There's about 98 higher income economies and 92 lower income economies. And what they're basically doing is they're doing receiving support from what's called a COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, what we call an AMC, where the donors make funding commitments to the manufacturers, and then the companies commit, different volumes of vaccines at prices that lower and middle income countries can afford. And overall, that goal is to provide around 20% coverage for their population. But I think what's really important to highlight here is that the effort to do this has a price tag of around $38 billion. And they only have about $11 billion so far. And there was a study that was commissioned by the International Chamber of Commerce, where they made it clear that, equitable distribution of vaccines is going to be in every country's interest. And again, most wealthy nations, we think we're going to be vaccinated by the summer or the fall. But for the developing world, you're looking at 2023 or 2024. And according to this report, that could cost about $9 trillion. So, because we're all connected, they make the case that, in terms of just distribution of supply and parts, if you disrupt those global supply chains, you're going to continue to see devastating effects on our economy. So really, until we get the whole globe vaccinated and you don't have those disruptions, you're going to continue to see, effects for all of us. So my hope is that, that the ACT Accelerator, groups like the ACT Accelerator, they are able to get the funding that they need to achieve their goal. Otherwise, I think that we are going to have a far greater cost in the future. And I think, that this is an area that there's been so much work and it's been a heroic effort, but I think we still have a long way to go.
Yep. No, that's, I think you could spend probably an entire panel just on that one topic. I know it's I think it's crucial. And I think we all understand that, and as much as this virus originated elsewhere, that we can't turn a blind eye as to what's going on, as we track sort of public health, right, in other countries. So I think that's our time. I just want to thank our panelists, for the great comments. I think this has been very, very helpful, and I wish everybody the best of luck. And I know that there are some listening who have friends and family members who are struggling with COVID as we speak, and our thoughts and prayers are with them, and hope everything turns out as well as it can. So we want to thank our panelists. This has been, I think, really helpful, and I know our community will really enjoy this coming days. So hopefully it sticks around for a while. Thank you so much.
The key is to think positive but test negative.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.